G'day, Professor Joseph Drew here. I'm here to talk about taxes and inflation. Many of us, for the first time in our lives, are experiencing a high inflation environment. Many people are labouring under misapprehensions about who inflation hurts most and the relationship between inflation and taxes. So in this video, I'll cover what happens for federal, state, and local government. So please watch all the way through. It's a short video, but it's an extremely important one. Now, before I start, I have a favor to ask of you. I need to justify the resources I use on these videos to my employer. To do so, the best way is to get the subscriber numbers up. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. If you know other councillors and other local government people, please send the video to them and encourage them to subscribe, because if I don't get those numbers up, the chances are I won't be making videos for you in the future. Now, let's get stuck into things. Inflation is not necessarily a bad thing for government. This will come as a big surprise to you, because they're all out there with the rhetoric saying how horrible inflation is and how committed they are to the inflation fight, even though their fiscal policies at present are still stoking inflation. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. Who are the winners and the losers from inflation? The people that win in inflation are people with large debts, because the real value of the debt is going down in proportion to inflation. Now, who has the largest debt? You can see from this graph, it's the Commonwealth Government. They have a absolutely massive debt, which is a big disgrace in a intergenerational equity sense. Our state governments also have extremely large debts. So they're quietly quite pleased that the real value of those debts are going backwards. Moreover, a lot of their taxes, because of inflation, are going up in nominal terms. So inflation is not a particularly bad thing for our federal government and our state governments. Now, you'll notice from that graph there, local government have very small amounts of debt. They are not a beneficiary from inflation from a debt perspective. And indeed, local governments generally sitting on a fair bit of capital, usually capital grants tied to particular projects. And that is a huge problem for local government, because the real value, the purchasing power of that capital they've set aside to build things that are absolutely essential infrastructure is going backwards. So they're going to have to dip into their pocket to put more money into those projects to actually get those projects done when they can finally get construction people to do the work. As I said, there's different implication for taxes in an inflationary environment depending on the tier of government and the particular taxes. So I'm just going to look at the main sources of taxes here. And the one I'm thinking of particularly for federal government is your PAYG tax, the tax they levy on income earners, and corporate taxes. Now, in an inflationary environment, as you've probably seen in the news, wage earners are now asking for very high pay increases and getting them in the order of 6% also to keep up with inflation. Their wages go up by 6%. What does that do? It means the amount of tax they pay will go up accordingly, and for some of them it'll go up disproportionately higher because they've moved into a higher tax band. So from the federal government's perspective, inflation increases wages. As wages go up, their tax receipts in nominal terms go up on those wages. And moreover, they get this extra bonus when people get pushed up into higher tax brackets. It's not quite as good for the corporate taxes because we have fixed corporate tax rates, but it's still the same deal. In an inflation environment, assuming the corporations can manage and pass on the additional cost to the consumers, which they haven't all done in full yet. But if they can, their tax liabilities will go up, and in nominal terms, the federal government will be collecting more taxes. Interestingly, if you're a wage earner or you run a business, you're probably going to be paying more taxes as a result of inflation, but you're not going to see that as a tax increase. you're not going to feel that and perceive it as a tax increase. You'll just think, oh yeah, it's just happened because it comes out of your wage every fortnight. You don't even notice it. It's a less visible tax. That's very interesting, and keep that point in mind when we get to local government in a few seconds. And for state government, inflation is not necessarily a bad thing, particularly, as I said, because a lot of them are sitting on large debts, but a lot of their tax receipts are going up. Think about the GST. Okay, it's collected by the federal government, but where does the money actually go? It goes to the state government. So it is a state government tax, whether we like it or not. Now, what's happening with inflation? Prices of things are going up. If you bought fuel lately, if you bought groceries lately, you know it's going up far higher than what the ABS is suggesting to us at present. Now, when those prices go up, GST is a flat 10% on the price of the good, so therefore the GST component of it is going up with inflation. Therefore, in nominal terms, your state governments are picking up more tax as a result of inflation in all likelihood. The other big area of tax is stamp duties. Now, if there's inflation in the housing market, in the car prices, well, then they will also be picking up more tax from those sources. Now, interestingly, just like the federal government tax, this is a very non-visible tax. Most people don't even think about the GST. You do think about stamp duty when you pay it, but you rarely actually, buy a new house or car, so it rarely enters the consciousness. You certainly probably are not perceiving that inflation is adding to your tax liability to the state government, is putting your taxes up. I don't see anyone out there protesting and complaining because their state government taxes have gone up, but indeed they have gone up. This is just a fact. But when it comes to local governments, it's a completely different story. If property prices go up, it doesn't affect their total tax take, because all we use the property price for is to divide up the ratio of the tax burden for each person. Moreover, if you're unfortunately a local government in New South Wales or Victoria where there's a rate cap, inflation has actually made your life so much harder, because the rate cap methodologies were not built for a high inflation environment. The independent services that do it, IPART and ESC, I think they do a wonderful job on the whole, but they're stuck with legislation and methodologies that were never built for a high inflation and increasing inflation environment like we have. Accordingly, local governments in Victoria and New South Wales were given really completely insufficient rate caps this year. So they can only lift their rates in New South Wales by 0.7%. It's nowhere near inflation. The relative part of the PPI is about 9%. So in real terms, they're going back considerably in the purchasing power of the rates revenue they can collect. Now, what does the local government have to do then? Their taxes don't automatically go up with inflation like the federal government does and the state government does, and no one complains about it, and no one protests about it, and no one even notices it. Unfortunately for local government, to put up the rates, certainly in states with rate capping, but even in states without rate capping, you've got to go to your community and make it explicit and say that you are putting up the taxes and how much they're putting them up. Do you see the difference? State and federal governments get the benefit of inflation in nominal terms on their taxes. Local government gets no benefit from inflation, and instead they have to go out to their community and explain why they're putting up their taxes. They have to do it explicitly instead of it automatically happening and flying under the radar like it does with our federal and state governments. This is why local government is in a real bind at the moment, because this putting up rates ends up getting politicized. People notice it. Yet, as I say, it's ironic because they're not noticing the fact that their state government and federal taxes are going up quite considerably. So as I said, it's set up a huge challenge for local government, but it's a challenge that you cannot ignore. Your tax revenue has to at least keep pace with inflation. If it doesn't, your financial sustainability in all likelihood will wane. And there's already a lot of councils in Australia who are close to crisis point. So we're all going to have to do a lot more work about telling and educating the community about the relative fairness of the rate system. of a tax based on land value. I've got several videos out there on that, and I'm happy for you to use my videos as part of your education campaign any way, shape or form. You don't have to pay me anything, tell me, I don't care, just use them, snip out the bits you need, put them up on your website for your council. That's fine by me. I'm here to help. You need to communicate clearly to your community the value for money they get for their rates. You think about the rates as a proportion of your income compared to the other taxes you pay. So I pay about 50 grand to the federal government. State government with GST and stamp duties and things, I probably pay 10 grand to them. I get no federal state services at all. I get very little value out of that 60 odd grand I pay to those tiers of government. My local government taxes are about $1 grand and I get exceptional value. The roads I drive on all the time, the rubbish collected, and all the other important recreational and cultural services that my local government provides. We need to get that message across to our community that local government taxes are a morally good tax, they're an economically good tax, and they are great value for money. We also need to educate our community about the effect of inflation on local government. And please do not keep making that mistake that a lot of local governments are making, a lot of regulators are making, of talking about CPI. Most of it's pretty irrelevant to local governments. Local governments don't buy household goods and services like bananas. It's the PPI component that is relevant, the engineering component in particular, and that's much higher than CPI. We need to get that message out and explain that if our rates don't at least match inflation, in real terms, it's going backwards. In real terms, we're giving a tax discount to our residents. And in real terms, we will not be sustainable into the future, which means we're placing a heavy burden on our children and our grandchildren, which is just plain unjust. We need to work on these rate cap systems in both of the states that run them and the legislation that goes with them, and make them fit for purpose to deal with an inflationary environment, because that's what we've got and will have for some time. And we must avoid the politicization of rates. We really must not turn it into a political issue. We must have the political courage to do what is necessary to protect future generations. Look, I bet that video made you think about taxes and inflation in lots of different ways that you'd never really thought about. As I say, the federal government's doing lots of chirping about inflation, but it's not actually hurting them that much, and same with the state governments. But it does hurt local government a lot, and the first step is we need to recognise it and understand why, and that's why I do these videos. So if you know someone in local government that's not watching them, that's not subscribed, flick them a copy of it, ask them to subscribe. As I say, you can use these videos in training, use them on your council website, whatever is necessary. It could be, because we do need to educate the public so that they understand why we are asking for a rate increase, and the fact that we, unlike the other tiers, we are actually doing it fairly and explicitly and making sure people know that our taxes are going up. We don't do the sneaky tax increases. That's what state and federal governments do. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.